I want to start by asking you to kind of paint your picture before Vietnam. You know, what was your life like before Vietnam? What kind of family did you grow up in? Minnesota guy?
I'm a Minnesota guy. I grew up in southern Minnesota until my junior year in high school. At the end of my junior year, my dad got a job in St. Cloud, and so we moved to St. Cloud then. So my senior year, and I was in southern Minnesota at a little town named Leroy, where we had a high school class of 42. And when I moved to St. Cloud, we had a high school class of 600. So I was a little bit of culture shock. And my homeroom was as big as my whole class at Leroy. And my dad worked at the prison as a guard, not as a license plate maker, but as a guard. And he, that's where the job was, and that's where we moved to. And I graduated from St. Cloud Tech High School in 1965, and then my goal then, I was going to go to St. Cloud State College. That's what I was going to do, and I did. One of the things though, when I graduated from high school on June 3rd, and on 8th I turned 18, so I had to register for the draft. That was a big deal at that time for me, because every male had to sign up for the draft, and there was a war going on, and you had to be available. Well, I got a school deferment, and I went to St. Cloud State, and I worked at it, but not as hard as I should have. I discovered beer, and I discovered that there was an incredible amount of good-looking girls in my age group, and between the two of those, it took away from my study time. So I wasn't doing the best in school, and I was just wasting my time. I was really too immature. And so I signed up in the military, and with my parents' blessing, and I made it through 2 quarters, and the following May I entered into the Army.
Why did you choose the Army?
Well, I wanted to go in the Marine Corps, but my father was a Marine, and my dad impressed upon me that we already had one in a family, we didn't need any more. So I went in the Army, and we figured in the Army I could pick schooling a little better than just being drafted or just going in the Marine Corps. When I dropped out, I'd already signed up, and then I dropped out of school. 2 weeks after I dropped out of school, I got a draft notice, but I had already enlisted, so I already had a date to go. But I still had to go down and retake my physical. I had already passed the physical, a couple weeks before, and everything was on go, and I get this draft notice, and I have to go down again. And some of the guys when I did the draft physical, a couple guys remembered who I was, and they asked me, "What the heck are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I got called to come down again. I got drafted." They said, "Oh, you should have ignored that." Well, I didn't know that. It's one thing about being a Minnesota guy or Midwest, or we're pretty naive here as to either coast. The term Minnesota nice is for a reason, and that's because we're pretty nice people, and we're just a little bit naive. So I was kind of overwhelmed by that when I signed up in the Army, to find out that I was really immature, and I did need some training to get myself to be the mature soldier that I needed to be. And so I'm never unhappy that I went in the military, because it really made me grow up. And from the time I entered in the military, or I dropped out of school and entered in the military, did my military commitment, and when I came back to school, I decided to come back to college. College was so much easier for me. It was just a snap. And partly I was 22. I was more mature. I didn't need to set any beer drinking records. I was I was a little more focused on my education. That's how it started. And then after graduation, I got hired up in Cloquet. I got a teaching job in Cloquet, and we moved there, and we've been there ever since. My wife and I, and we raised our family there, and this is where we're going to stay, in the Northland.
Mm-hmm. So can you tell me what basic training was like for that guy of 18? That must have been quite the culture shock.
Well, it was the physical part of it. To me, it seemed like I was going to be in like 10 or 12 weeks in a row having Phi Ed. That part of it was just kind of fun. I was, I played college football and was in training, and I was in pretty good shape. So the physical part of basic training didn't really affect me that much. The mental training was a little different. My parents, I had a nice, strict family, and we had rules we had to follow, but they didn't necessarily yell at me all the time. And you get, sometimes in the military, you get caught in situations that a yes or a no is the wrong answer to say, and you would pay a price for doing that. And so the mental stress or the toughening up of me was much harder on me than the physical part of it. But I think that I definitely grew up when I came out of there. And I was in my basic training was in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and I was there for a summer, and it was hot, and it was humid. But I guess that'd be better than being there in the cold. I didn't want to do that.
So, hot and humid, what was it like to actually get to Vietnam? Talking about humid.
Well, let's back up just a little bit.
Because we have to talk MOS too, what year?
After I had basic training, then I got sent to New Jersey, and I was in New Jersey for almost a year in working on my MOS. And my MOS was, I was a crypto computer repairman. And we fixed the machines that would turn typewritten messages into cipher. And if I'm going to communicate with you, I would type it out, and we'd feed it into our machine, and it would come out of these crypto machines as a real garbled mess. When you would get it, you would get that garbled mess. Your machine would then turn it back into print so that we could get the message. Well, the machines that I first worked on were all tube-oriented machines. This is, how it dates back a ways. And the tube machines had to be in air-conditioned buildings, and it was called fixed crypto or fixed repair. So it had to be in a communication center that was nice and cool. And I thought that would be a much better deal for me. Along the way, I also got trained in a machine that would operate in the field. And I thought, boy, I'm expanding my horizons. The more I know, the better it is. Well, as it turns out, knowing the field stuff got me out into the field. And after I was in New Jersey, then I got sent to Germany. And I was in Germany or Europe for 7 months. And we went all over the continent, all over Europe, setting up secure communication sites for our officers. And that part of it, we went to Seville, Spain, we went to Ankara, Turkey, we went to Thessalonica, Greece, and we went to Cyprus, and we went down into would be Libya now, and it was just we'd set up these communications, and really it was for the holidays because the officers were going to go on vacation, and then there was parts of Germany that had some vacation spots that officers would go to, and so they had to have secure communications, And that's what we did there, and that was kind of unique. I was there for just a little over 7 months, and there was a levy sent down, through the Army that they needed some guys in Vietnam. Well, they sent 5,000 of us to Vietnam, and then the picnic was over for me. Then, when I first got to Vietnam in January of 1968, I was at a base camp for a while, and we did have a building that was air conditioned that our crypto machines were in. But as the need for more secure communications with the field, they took us guys that were field trained, and we got to go out in the fields with it, and that was not as much fun.
What was that like? What exactly were you doing to set up the field communication?
Well,
did they have to be air conditioned? Because
no,
man,
no, these did not. These are all transistorized by this time, and no, they did not have to be air conditioned. They worked outside, and we had to hook our crypto machines up to radar that would shoot out the messages, and from one station to another, one spot to another. But carrying that machine weighed about 35 pounds or so. That just put an extra target on you. So, I mean, to the enemy, you appeared to be a little more important. That was kind of the downside of all of that. And so I honestly was scared for a year. I was scared for a year until my time was going to be up. And I had been I got to Vietnam in approximately the middle of the month in January '68, and 2 weeks later, the Tet Offensive took place in Vietnam, and the Tet Offensive actually started in the city that I was at. It was called Nha Trang. It was like in the central part of Vietnam, right on the ocean, and the times for the Viet Cong got mixed up somehow, and it was supposed to. I don't know the exact times. I'm just going to use the example, but it was supposed to start at like 6 o'clock throughout the country. The Tet Offensive was going to start. Well, it started at 4 o'clock in Nha Trang. There was a 2-hour communications gap with them, and it started 2 hours early in our city. And the base camp that I was at, we got overrun. And I was only in country for just a little less than 2 weeks. So like I said, I was afraid big time for the rest of the time I was there. And it wasn't all bad, but still that constant fear that it could happen again. And then we would get mortared. If I was there for 365 days, we got mortared 360 of them. And it was chaos the whole time. That's when I think of the year itself that I spent there, it was just chaos. And I think that was meant to be to keep us Americans, who are kind of used to schedules, just off schedule all the time. And that's what I always tell people, that my year in Vietnam was 1 year of chaos.
So you had all of these other guys who were trained like you were, and you said there were 5,000 of you who...
Well, there were 5,000 guys that went. There was only...
But how many of you would be working together?
There wasn't any.
No, you were just
None of the 5,000 guys ended up where I was at, that I know of. I mean, in the immediate bunch that I was with, there wasn't anybody.
So what was your average day? Who were you with?
Well, let me give you an average day first back in the base camp, central camp. That was, we'd work 12-hour shifts in a communication center, and we had row after row of machines that would scramble messages and send them to different places. Then in another room attached onto our building was a whole setup of typewriter, teletype machines. And there would be guys typing messages or messages sent to them, and they would make a tape, with the holes punched in it. Then those tapes then would be sent to us, sent to our side, and it would go right directly into our machines, and our machines then would set it up in the cipher, and it would be sent out to, we had them in Thailand, we had them in the Philippines, Hawaii, all over. We had some that went directly to the U.S. But that was the goal there, was to make sure that they were encrypted messages. Now that was, then we would be there for 12 hours. Then we would go back to our tents and spend the rest of the day in the tent, or sleep there. That was it. We didn't do a lot of sightseeing because there wasn't that many sights to see, but there were lots of sights to see, not many that appealed to us to go see. But then when I'm in the field, that was directly connected to what the infantry was going to do, whatever their mission or whatever their setup for the day was. And we might be crashing through the jungle and chasing around the Viet Cong or North Vietnamese army and doing that, trying to take a hill or secure villages, and wherever we would stop, that's where our communications would start right from there. So we did get shot at a few times. Those days were kind of never ending, because when you were in the field at night, let's say you're going to take a break for the day, well, you had to have a secure area to do that with, and you never were completely sure how secure the area was going to be. So it was very, very frightening. Sleep was at a minimum. So you learned to kind of grab sleep whenever you could. Just if it was 10 minutes, that would be just to kind of quickly recharge the battery so you can go again. And the weather, we talked a little hot and humid. It was hot and humid. Then we had the monsoon season, the rainy season. Well, for the rainy season over there, it was cold. But cold meant, 50 degrees, not Minnesota cold. But because it was always, you were just wet all the time, and it was a little cooler, it tested your ability to not get sick. And the conditions were not so clean. It was a test, and we were always real happy when we got to come back to the base camp area.
And I can't imagine that keeping the equipment running was always easy in that situation either. The damp and the rot and the dirt and
Yeah, it was a challenge, and you want to make sure you keep the equipment dry before you keep yourself dry. But we had glitches at times, and it would be weather related, and it doesn't take much moisture to throw off an electronic circuit. So yeah, it was a constant battle.
Do you have a luckiest day in Vietnam, the day of near miss, or where you thought you weren't going to make it?
Yes, but I would say, you want to say my luckiest day? That was the day I came home. But we got mortared regularly and shot. And even at our base camp was right close to an airstrip. the Nha Trang Air Force Base and airstrip was there, and the enemy constantly fired mortar rounds onto the airstrip, trying to wreck it or hit airplanes or just disrupt, that structure. They weren't always the best shots, and if they were a little long with their mortars, which they were regular, that's where our base was. And so we had, I know, mortars that were intended for the air base that landed in our base camp or in our area. So, but every day, it was going to be something like that. So, but during the Tet Offensive, I'm just there. I'm a greenhorn rookie, and we have the enemy inside our wire, inside our base camp, running around, shooting and trying to bomb us, with hand devices, satchel charges or grenades of some kind to, wreck our place and kill us if possible. And when it ended, or when we drove them out, that felt pretty good. That felt pretty good. And the Tet Offensive, for all the ballyhoo that it gets, and it was really quite the effort by the North Vietnamese, the Viet Cong. But if you look at an overall battle, the Tet Offensive caused the Viet Cong just tremendous losses. And they would have, it's a battle that they actually lost, but the ability that was shown that they could surprise attack us with such great ferocity, sent messages back to our country that we didn't seem to be prepared. And that was kind of the message that, from what I understand, was what happened. People got back here. This kind of a low-level military really, kicked butt on the big-time green machine. And that wasn't actually the case, but that's how it was perceived. And so it was a little demoralizing for us, knowing that we had really, kicked their butt big time and dealt them tremendous losses. But it was perceived as a loss for us. So the morale would be not at the highest levels it should be after that. And that was being through the press and through the Congress and our government. It was not. It was kind of brought to light that we weren't ready, and that's not the real truth.
Do you have a worst day in Vietnam?
Well, I have a day, and I don't know if it's on one of the pictures that I brought it up, but I happen to be back at the base camp, and I go by a structure that has Merry Christmas written across it. Merry Christmas. And I was thinking, Merry Christmas? We're in a war zone. And we had at that time we had a truce. We were going to have a Christmas time truce. And all I know is that on Christmas Eve, we got mortared big time. And on Christmas Day, we got mortared again and shelled and attacked. And I thought, well, what happened to the truce? I guess we only had the truce with us. And so that day was real ugly, because I'm seeing a sign that says Merry Christmas. And I thought, well, it's not a real Merry Christmas. And at that particular time, I was getting close to my end of duty. And so then you're even extra careful to make sure that you make it to that day. And I just thought that was kind of a real unique situation, to have Merry Christmas written up on a building and then have mortars coming in, shells.
So how was it for you coming home?
Well, I was very happy. we left Cam Ranh Base, South Vietnam, at 7 o'clock on the morning of January 12th, 1969. We flew on a plane, a regular commercial flight. It was a Braniff at that time. And Braniff, we flew to Tokyo, and we got some more gas. Then from Tokyo, we went to Seattle. And that's where we were gonna, depart in Seattle. And when we got to Tokyo and we landed, it was a nice enough day, and we were taken off the airplane. Everyone was taken off the airplane, but while we were on the tarmac and the runway, it was a big rope put around all of it. We had to stand in a group, and there was a rope wrapped around all of us because we were quarantined, and they didn't want us necessarily out with the general public at all. So that we were standing on the airstrip with a rope around us. But the unique part of that was then there was all kind of vendors going around the circle, going around selling cameras and tape recorders and speakers and all kind of electronic equipment. They didn't seem to worry about the quarantine, but we couldn't mix with the general population. They got us back on the plane, and from there, when we flew all the way, we flew back to Seattle. When we got to Seattle, it was 6 o'clock in the morning on January 12th, 1969. So according to the clock, it was an hour before we took off. But with the international dateline, it screwed everything up for us. But we were so happy. When we left Cam Ranh Bay, though, at 7 o'clock in the morning, it was 72 degrees. When I got to Seattle, it was about 30, or a little less than that. But it was cold, but we were so happy. There was 200 guys coming off an airplane kissing the tarmac, the runway. We're so happy to be back in America. And that day I got discharged from the Army that day. And I got back to Minneapolis at 6 o'clock on January 12th, again 6 o'clock in the evening, and it was 31 below. And so it was a 100-degree temperature change for me. But I was so happy. I was so happy to be home, even though it was cold. And my dad came down to the Minneapolis airport and picked me up. And we drove back to St. Cloud, and I think that we stopped at every American Legion or VFW between St. Cloud and Minneapolis. And so we finally got home, and I got to see my mom and my little brother and sister, and it was pretty happy. But it was a different era. Or my dad was from a different generation. He's a World War II veteran. I was home for one day, and he said, "Well, you're going to get a job pretty quick, aren't you?" I said, "Well, let me adjust here for a couple days. I said, let me get my body clock right, because it's, when it was daytime in Minnesota, it's nighttime in Vietnam," and I was all confused trying to get my body clock going again, or the jet lag, or whatever you want to call it. And it took a few days, and I finally did. But some of the experiences we had from the Army base, Fort Lewis, to the airport, we got spit on and things thrown at us. The officials at the Army base said you should go back in your civilian clothes. Well, I didn't have any civilian clothes then, because I just came back from the jungle. And if you flew back, you got to fly back military standby, but you had to have your uniform on. And it was really kind of ugly to come back knowing that you did the duty that you were supposed to. Or I got called. I was in the service, and had people call you a lot of ugly names and spit at you and yell at you, and like, this isn't right. You shouldn't be yelling or spitting at us. You should be at the powers to be that got us in this mess. When I got back to St. Cloud, and now I'm back in safe in Minnesota again, and where it's a little more naive, like I said earlier, and it was fantastic then to be back home. But then I would see guys that I some of my friends, and geez, where you been? I haven't seen you for a while. I said, well, I was in the Army for 3 years. I just came back from Vietnam. Oh, okay. How was that? And it was just right over the heads of me and other people. It wasn't the best time, okay, but that was it. And like I said, my dad was a World War II veteran. My grandpa, on my mom's side, was a World War I veteran, and he got drafted and called into the Army. My dad, was in the Marine Corps, but got called in, and that was their duty. That was part of being American. That if your country called, then that was you would do your service. Well, the same happened to me for Vietnam, and like I said, being that naive Minnesota guy, we didn't know any different, and we just went off and did our duty. And then to come back and be treated so poorly, it was, even to the point where when I'm talking, the Vietnam vet guys that came back at my time, and we tried to join organizations and military organizations and get all kind of static from other veterans telling us that, well, you guys really weren't in a war and this and that, and it was just a little vacation in a warm spot, and we don't think you should be in. Well, finally enough level heads prevail to say that we need to get these guys in our organizations because this is going to be the lifeline that keeps us going. But it was at least a 50-50 split that didn't want us in the organizations, and that was kind of disheartening too. Since then, I'm a VFW member, and I have been. Well, I'm a lifetime VFW member, and I've been active in our local VFW post in Cloquet, and it's been very rewarding, and that the times have changed, and probably if the Vietnam vet has done anything for other veterans, it is that we've kind of paved the way home for current veterans, that we don't, if we're upset with what's happened in other places, we're upset with the powers that be. We're not upset with the soldiers themselves. They're just doing their duty. So I look that's been a positive for us, that we helped other veterans now get home and be treated the way they should be treated. And I'm very proud of that.
Is there enduring change that Vietnam made in you? The guy who left at 18 and the guy who returned 3 years later. Is there a lasting change that Vietnam made in you?
Well, definitely yes. And the changes are that I was in the military, but I really grew up when I was in Vietnam. And I turned 21 when I was in Vietnam. I got to vote. I got to vote for the first time in 1968, the year that I was in Vietnam. I got to do an absentee ballot. And sorry to say Hubert Humphrey lost, but I did get to vote. And turned 21 and got to vote all in that year. It made me grow up and made me be, I don't know if I want to say more patriotic. It made me feel that I had done something for my country. And I'm a firm believer that we should have a draft to this day. And we should draft every 18-year-old kid, male or female, that they would go into 2 years of government service of some kind, not necessarily the military, but just add, just do 2 years of some kind of duty to kind of get a little more stakes in the game, or pay your due shares, at some time. And I think that 2 years then would help all of us, grow up. I mean, male and female, that would serve, like I said, for 2 years. Then you can get help with college or whatever you need after that. But just 2 years of government duty, and I that's what I feel happened. Changed me as much as anything. Just that I did my time. I did my time. It sounds like a prison deal, but I felt that I grew up, and I wouldn't change my military time. I maybe wouldn't go to Vietnam. If I could have that choice to stay someplace else, but I went there, and I came back home, and then ever since I've been back home, I just try to plug into society and just fit in the best I can. I still have nightmares, but we have had lots and lots of traumatic experiences in that 1 year that have stayed with me to this day. And then we had we have some contact with Agent Orange. I don't know if anybody else has talked about that at all, but the Agent Orange, the defoliant that was used in the jungle to strip the leaves off the jungle canopy so that you could see to the ground. There were convoys of trucks flowing down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. You couldn't see from above because the jungle canopy was so thick. Well, this Agent Orange worked at taking off the leaves, but it's also left a huge impression on a number of other people with a lot of the effects that happen from the contacts of Agent Orange. Well, for years and years and years, the government's denied that anything ever happened with that. That it was just something that was used, and there wasn't any side effects. Or then you find out that we as soldiers or people, the Vietnamese even, were lied to about that, and your mistrust of government increases quite a bit. And so I guess that has been a lasting impression on me too, that we as soldiers and we as American people were lied to for so long to cover up the things that happened in Vietnam, that there's still some mistrust of how the government works.
I can see that. I also, I know that you talk to high schoolers.
I do. When, let's back up even a little more. I've been married for 46 years. And my wife and I never, ever talked about my time in Vietnam, other than a few joking experiences or something that happened, but we never talked anything serious for 35 years that we were married. And I had got involved with the vet center in Duluth, and at that time they said, I should try to communicate with my wife a little bit more. Well, what I was doing then, I called at the high school I worked at to speak to kids about our Vietnam experience. Well, when I used to do that, it would be probably 2 weeks on each side of the days that I spoke or talked to them that I was just a mess. I couldn't sleep. I was having super nightmares, but every time that I did it, I got a little better. And that really opened up the lines of communications, and then I was able to talk with my wife, honestly, of most of the things that happened. Not everything, but most of the things that happened. And since then, our relationship is so much stronger. And not that it wasn't, but it's so much stronger now. And I've been talking to high schools for 20 years. And every time I do it, it makes it a little bit easier, or I don't get so wound up, and it cuts down. I don't have 2 weeks worth of nightmares anymore on each side, and that part of it has really helped me. So, like I said, but the main thing of all that is, I mean, speaking with high schools has been great, but it has helped with my wife and I. We have our relationship is so much stronger that I just hope other guys can do that, and it helps you break out of the doldrums that you've been in for years. That, I mean, there's a lot of things that are inside of veterans that get bottled up, and too many are dealt with alcohol, drugs, or just secluding yourself away from population. That it's very unhealthy for you, and I hope that other guys get out and do this. Here, speaking with you here, Julie, is just, this helps open the gates for me as well to do these things, and and to find out that most all of us as Vietnam vets are guys that just came and tried to plug into society and fit in, and not, and yeah, I'm a veteran, I'm a Vietnam veteran, but I'm not a Vietnam vet. One of those guys that, well, you must be a drug addict and a alcoholic and live in boxes underneath the bridges. Well, there are some, not that many. I mean, most of us are just trying to be a part of America, just trying to fit in.
Amen. Is there anything that I didn't give you a chance to say that you feel is important for people to understand or know, or any lesson that we should be learning from all of this?
Well, there's still a little stigma out there with Vietnam veterans that first we lost, or we lost the war, and that's not true. But that, like I said, most of us were just guys that got called to duty, and we went in. We didn't leave the country. We didn't, do the other ways of getting out of the draft. And then we did our duty, and we came back, and we just want to be just another American, trying to get by. I mean, we all have enough stuff to complain about without that, and just that. Don't look down your nose at Vietnam vets at all, and just remember, it was their time, and they did their duty, and that's all.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.